Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Hello, and thank you for listening. Whether it's on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn, or by podcast, I thank you for tuning in and listening. All right, so obviously we're going to have to give you the VP debate recap, but there's a lot more to learn about J.D. Vance other than how slick he performs behind a dais. And I'm going to tell you, first of all, you know me, I'm a Tim Walz guy. I was very early on. I didn't predict Kamala Harris was going to choose him, but I did say, that's the guy. That's the guy I would have preferred she chose. And my mind hasn't changed. I will say that up until about the 90th minute of the debate last night, J.D. Vance got the better of Tim Walz, though. Not so much that J.D. Vance out-factualized. He just outperformed. And a lot of that is, I mean, listen, this is an audio podcast, so a lot of what J.D. Vance was able to do, I can't relay to you because a lot of it was visual. Tim Walz had a lot of facial expressions in the split screen versus J.D. Vance's calm, slick grin, and of course the guy liner. But so I can't really relay a lot of that to you. But I can tell you that in a lot of ways there were some big fat meatballs just thrown down the heart of the plate that Tim Walz could have knocked over the fence many times. A lot of home runs he could have hit, and he just let the pitch go across the plate, not even taking a swing at it. I don't know if Governor Walz was over-prepared. No, actually, I do know. I believe he was over-prepared. And you heard a lot of scuttlebutt about his preparation, that it was Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, who was prepping him for the debate. Mayor Pete would have done a better job last night. Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, I think would have done a better job last night. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure that either one of them are more likable or more relatable than Governor Tim Walz. And I stand by my endorsement of that guy being the person who should be on the ticket. Doesn't change at all, one way, shape, form, or fashion. I watched the debate, and then I watched as on CNN, on Fox, the CBS Post conversation, NBC as well. I went all over the place. And in fact, I couldn't even get MSN to come on the satellite service that I was using. So I wound up checking out after the fact, like a couple hours after the debate, tuning in to see what they were saying. And I think their response was pretty measured as well. You see, I think it was CNN's post-debate poll, 51-49, Vance Walz, within the margin of error. I don't know if they really provide a margin of error on something like that. They were registered voters, not likely voters. So who knows? I think the do no harm mantra really holds true here. I don't think either candidate did any harm. I do think J.D. Vance probably helped himself and his campaign just a little bit by not flubbing it, as he has done just about everything else since becoming the nominee for vice president. So on that measure, I guess the fact that Trump, Vance personnel aren't scrambling to explain another bad night on a debate stage is net positive for them in some way, shape, form, or fashion, except for one key moment. And this was the moment that I think any measured mind watching this debate who could still be undecided, and I don't get you undecided, I really don't. How you're undecided at this point in time, I'll never understand. But anybody that was has to give pause after this back and forth.
This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously.
All right, if we're going to talk about censorship, we're banning books across the country if we want to talk about censorship. Elon Musk on the Twitter X platform is banning accounts he disagrees with. Does JD Vance have an opinion on that? Okay, I'm kind of losing focus myself on what the damning part of that clip was. The fact that JD Vance didn't just say immediately, yeah, that was 2020. He lost. Let's move on. He knows who's watching, the boss. He knows the boss is watching and will not say, of course he lost the 2020 election. And his boss, by the way, in a de facto press conference with reporters yesterday, really didn't help the case.
Do you trust the process this time around?
Did I what?
Do you trust the process this time around?
I'll let you know in about 33 days. No, look, I'm in 33 days.
So anybody who is independent-minded, if you're still an undecided voter, but seeing to it that our ability to keep showing up to vote at the local, at the state, at the federal level, and knowing that the outcome will be carried out by the will of the people, you have to give pause, right? Because while this time J.D. Vance is not vice president, would not be constitutionally charged with carrying out the certification of electoral votes, what if 4 years from now J.D. Vance is a vice president and charged with carrying out the count of electoral votes? Who, by the way, in 4 years you would surmise, because this in theory would be Trump's second term, that would mean J.D. Vance would likely be the nominee who would be in charge of certifying the electoral votes that he himself is involved in. It'd be like going back to the Brian Kemp era where he was overseeing his own election to governor of the state of Georgia. And we all know there were questions about that. Yeah, for me, it was up until that exchange that I thought the night was overwhelmingly for J.D. Vance to gloat about after the fact. Tim Walz had an opportunity to say the last word on this. And by the way, answer to the censorship questions by pointing out that he doesn't run social media.
I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this, he lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Again, that was pretty much towards the end of the debate. Actually, J.D. Vance said something pretty damning early in the debate as well that really kind of got buried in all the minutia of the back and forth beforehand. But I think this is important to add to that conversation.
It's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power.
I mean, sure, after 62 lawsuits and January 6th, if you want to call it peacefully turned over power, that's just such a mischaracterization. It's laughable on its face. That's not even accounting for the Coffee County voter information breach. That's not even accounting for the perfect phone call to Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, to find 11,780 more votes. That's not peacefully handing over power. That is protesting for months, literally 2+ months, plus January 6th. Yeah, listen, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that democracy is the top issue in this election cycle. How it's not is sort of beyond me, if I'm being honest. Obviously, it's the economy, stupid, women's reproductive rights. Those are two of the big issues. We've got the Middle East broiling into, could be a regional, if not global war. Thank you, Netanyahu, for not assisting there. We've got suddenly a dock worker strike. That could be an October surprise. There could be a multi-pronged October surprise, by the way, the Israeli situation, the dock worker strike. But it still sort of gives me pause that, and if you're an undecided independent voter, first of all, I don't understand how you are at this point, but this has to give you pause, right?
Oh, that this one is troubling to me. And I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up.
Right.
He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag. Several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop.
Governor Tim Walz putting it pretty succinctly. We have local Democratic strategist Andrew Heaton set to join us to go over some of the highlights and lowlights of last night's vice presidential debate and if there'll be any repercussions. Thank you for listening to The Ron Show. Incidentally, The Ron Show is coming up on its 3rd year in existence. Holy smokes. Time flies when you're having fun. Anyway, follow The Ron Show on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL, Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and of course, show notes as always at RonShowATL.com. And by the way, if you'd like to throw The Ron Show a little birthday gift via Cash App or PayPal, hey, we're not gonna be against that. This is pretty much a labor of love because it certainly isn't paying the bills. In fact, it's costing me money, but that's fine. I'm here to do this because I'm passionate about this. I love this country, and I believe in a future that is totally different than that of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. I will get into this guy named Curtis Yarvin and his association with J.D. Vance and why this should scare the absolute dog shit out of you a little bit later. First things first, though, friend of the show, returning champion, Andrew Heaton joins us. And Andrew has been consulting and managing campaigns you know and love, including that of the new DeKalb County CEO-elect, Elaine Cochran-Johnson. And you're working hard this election cycle to get Democrats elected up and down the ballot as well. I wanted to get your thoughts on the debate last night. Felt like a little bit of a shaky start, but towards the end, who do you think had the better night?
Well, look, I mean, let's start off with the fact that it's a vice presidential debate. It just doesn't move the needle unless there is just unless there's just a crazy moment. And
right.
You know, we can all think historically about the few moments from vice presidential debates that any of us remember, and I don't think this night is going to be in those halls.
Yeah,
I think it was fine. I don't think either of them walked away with what I would call a knockout victory. I think that J.D. Vance did what he needed to do. He is obviously very well polished when it comes to kind of the formal debate setting.
Yeah.
And he showed that. He was clean and polished. His answers were well prepared. He did not come off saying anything too weird or too creepy. So he beat back those allegations, as it were, a little bit. I think, Governor Walz obviously took a little time to heat up. He was obviously very, much more, I would say, nervous sounding than Vance was at the beginning. I think he definitely settled into his role by the end. I think when it comes to the actual substance of the answers, I think Governor Walz was very well prepared, maybe too prepared.
Yeah.
But I think on the substance of the answers, the one thing that was clear is Governor Walz was ready to try to give real substantive answers. And J.D. Vance was prepared to just say whatever the Trump talking points are in the slickest version possible. And by the end, some of those answers just kind of smacked you in the face with how audacious they were. I think for me, the moment of the night was the reinvention of history, where Donald Trump is the defender of the ACA.
Yeah, yeah.
I just sat there with my jaw on the ground, like we're really reinventing history.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is the defender of the ACA. What timeline do we live in?
And that's the thing that kind of kills me in these debate forums now. The media has been hamstrung to fact check. They cannot fact check now for fear of the opposition howling like scalded dogs that they have somehow been wronged. To me, that's more a sign that if you can't base your platform in reality, then yes, you should get fact checked. Unfortunately, not much fact checking done last night, at least not by the moderators. And the one time that facts were brought into the discussion regarding Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio. Again, J.D. Vance howled like a scalded dog. That's not fair.
If we're going to talk about the one night of the event that might be memeable, because that's all we care about these days.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, is what are the memes that are going to come out of it? And the one night that's memeable was Senator Vance going, "Hey, I thought it was against the rules to fact check." Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, but again, these are different times that we live in. I think that there are those that are going to take what J.D. Vance said about January 6th and the peaceful transition of power that he alleges Donald Trump, and just go, yeah, no, that was completely fine. And the fact that there was a little skirmish on the 6th, no big deal. I think there's 40% of the country that knows he's lying, doesn't care, and would be all for something like that happening again if this doesn't go their way again. And that's where I'm troubled.
Yeah, well, and I think as far as answers from Governor Walz that really stood out, his reaction to J.D. Vance's inability to say that President Trump lost the 2020 election, when prompted numerous times, just his flat out inability, his refusal to say, yes, President Trump lost, and Governor Walz pointing out that was a damning non-answer, I think was probably Governor Walz's best moment of the night, and probably the one that'll stick out. But I think just overall, both sides are going to come away with the impression they want to have of the night. And that tends to be how it is in debates, period. But like with President Trump and President Harris's debate, even when the Republicans tried to spin it as some kind of weird victory for President Trump, it was hard to do that. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be much easier for them to walk away last night and be like, oh no, yeah, Senator Vance, yeah, he did great. And, I think both sides got what they needed out of last night. I think if anything, and obviously this is going to be the only vice presidential debate, so we're not going to get another bite of the apple as far as this kind of forum goes. Mm-hmm. But I think the lesson for the Harris administration is, it felt like Governor Walz was kind of given a short leash last night in terms of in debate prep, and the high energy, rambunctious, like very eager dad energy that we have gotten from Governor Walz on the campaign trail was lacking last night. And I think that actually was a bit to his detriment. I mean, that's what people came to love about Governor Walz. That's why he burst onto the scene at the level and speed that he did. And I think, just kind of seeing him pulled back and trying to be restrained and trying to be more moderate toned kind of worked to his disadvantage, especially kind of early on in the debate.
And he may have been a bit over-prepared anyway. I feel, first of all, I saw him taking notes a lot. And that's, to me, that's not a negative. I'm fine with a guy taking notes or a candidate taking notes at the dais. I feel as if he was so intent on staying info-loaded that he wasn't actually even listening in some respects to the responses that he was going to respond to. And just stuck to some talking points that he had been force-fed. And, we heard beforehand he had been debate prepping with Pete Buttigieg, and that's tough in and of itself because Mayor Pete is really good at this and doesn't need the notes on the dais to keep track of the facts of whatever he's discussing.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it was obviously the strategy they went into with was you are going to be the facts guy. We're going to make our side is going to be the one that's going to have the true facts and the true figures and the true numbers. And that works for a candidate who naturally kind of can just ramble. And you're absolutely right about Mayor Buttigieg. Like that is who he is. You watch his interviews on Fox News, he can just spit out those facts, spit out those numbers, and still listen to and respond in the moment to whoever he's having a conversation with or an interview with. And I think that actually resulted last night. And, Governor Walz probably had a couple opportunities that if he had been listening to Senator Vance's response a little better, he could have given a real tit for tat that could have been a bit more of a, I don't want to say gotcha moment, but just a poppable moment. And I think he missed some of those because he was so intent on, okay, this question is about this. I need to make sure I say this, this, and this.
We're with Andrew Heaton, local Politico and Democratic strategist. More of this post-debate conversation when the Ron Show continues.
This is the Ron Show on America One Radio.
So we are doing a little post-VP debates banter with returning champion Andrew Heaton, local Democratic strategist, working on several campaigns here in Metro Atlanta and throughout the state of Georgia. We were talking off the air before we came back here about the polished versus the unpolished and how sometimes that can kind of work to the advantage of the candidate that might be a little unpolished. I think it's safe to say that it's pretty obvious that you had the school teacher, football coach, untraditional route to this point candidate versus the guy who went to Harvard and was actually working in public affairs while in the U.S. military and knows how to polish a turd, so to speak. Speak to that a little bit, because we were talking and I said, I'm a little surprised sometimes when I watch these debates how maybe it's the fact that I'm just so ensconced in this 5 days a week that I know the talking points. I know the reactionary statements to make when misinformation is flung at you. And so much misinformation is flung at these debates that you have to fact check and state your cause at the same time. And unfortunately, I think that puts Democrats at a disadvantage. But it surprises me sometimes when something is stated that's a distortion or a flat out lie, and it's just not easily eviscerated by the candidate at the dais. And you said, essentially, they're human beings. We're not all encyclopedias or robots that know how to respond with, to a distortion the way a Mayor Pete Buttigieg could. Mayor Pete, I think, would be fantastic in any debate setting, but he may not have been the perfect candidate to put to this ticket.
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying off air, there are certain politicians, and I've been around long enough and have been around enough of these folks. You can see the difference between politicians who essentially were put into politician incubators early on in their life.
Yeah.
And J.D. Vance was early on in his life, going from Ohio State to Yale Law, to the VC world, to the electoral world. Like he was kind of put in that politician incubator, and given plenty of opportunities to turn himself into this almost polished robotic politician. And even though at times on the trail, you wonder how do you say things that you say with that background? Whereas Governor Walz, I mean, he is more of that real person who kind of almost accidentally ended up in electoral politics. I mean, this was a guy you could see an alternative reality where his life ended retiring as a high school football coach and spending out his days just as a retired teacher and dad and grandpa. And that comes across, and while in on the trail and in real world settings, that absolutely works to Governor Walz's advantage. Because when you see them on the trail, you're like, oh, this is a real human who has real emotions, who feels real things and understands my plight. And that works on the trail. But when you put them in this specific political world, environment of a debate, that tends to work in the favor, at least in terms of coming off as polished. That works for the one who came through the incubator. And so, yes, J.D. Vance is much more ready to give I've already done my chess moves 3 moves ahead to figure out where this is going to go. And I've got my retorts ready. But I will say there are certain moments where, and I think Vice President Harris does kind of a good job of this in balancing her very strong ability to debate with the facts while also mixing in real human emotions. You saw that a lot during her debate with President Trump. And I think one of the things I did appreciate Governor Walz last night, you saw certain moments where his especially towards the end, kind of that human emotion side that we all resonate with did come through, and kind of the way he was shaking his head, almost astonished at J.D. Vance's response on January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And he just, you saw him just kind of like, shaking, his mouth was agape and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. And you're like, yeah, that's a real emotion he's feeling right now, because he cannot believe that his opponent on this stage cannot say the truth about January 6th. And so, it varies, mileage varies on what the viewer is looking for. And that's why I say again, I think both sides are probably going to walk away with what they wanted out of this debate. There was no clear knockout. I'd give Governor Walz the edge on actual truth and facts.
Of course.
I'd give Senator Vance probably the edge on polish and crispness. And no matter what lies were behind that crispness.
Yeah, so I also felt like that the January 6th moment at the end, while many folks may have tuned out because the debate was way too civil for a lot of folks to watch. There were no knockout blows. It wasn't a cat fight or anything like that. I feel like the civility, the civil tone of the debate leading up to the January 6th moment made the January 6th moment all that more, jaw-dropping, if not for the audience, obviously for Governor Tim Walz, because I think he felt like he was having an honest discussion, a difference in policy, but at least a civil discussion, and two reasonable adults were having a conversation, and all of a sudden, it's unreasonable that a guy can't still 4 years later say, yeah, we didn't win that one, but we're going to win this one. Just as simple as that. It would have been so easy, but obviously the boss is watching, so he can't say that. And I think that that carries some weight.
Yeah, you hope so. And you hope that, so I heard somebody kind of say it the other night, and I think this is how it played out. The presidential debate was for the base. The base turned into the presidential debate, and they got the meat they needed. They got the combative, they got the, stick it to them. Yeah, I gotcha. Last night was for the in-between moderates who maybe for some unknown reason to me have not made up their mind about this election yet.
Yeah.
And that was this was their place to be able to buy in and say, okay, well, I'm someone who in real life, I try to not lose friends over politics. I try to not argue about politics. I just want to make a decision based on, information and facts. This was their debate. And in fact, I think you can tell both candidates, that's who they were tuning their performance for, was, and that's why they both went out of their ways to say, hey, we're having a civil debate. This is what it should be about. This is what America should be about, is just being able to, have differences of opinion. And the reality is that might be true for those two candidates on stage. Unfortunately, again, they are not actually the presidential candidates. And the actual presidential candidates offer very starkly different takes on how to have debates. I think that's what you saw last night was them trying to give something a place to buy in for those moderates in between who are still trying to make a decision.
Well, I think the moderates that they're trying to win over are honestly people who are probably traditionally Republican voters who just can't stomach the idea of voting for Donald Trump again. And J.D. Vance's mission was to show them, listen, don't worry about me. Don't worry about me not being like Mike Pence. But the January 6th moment reminds us he ain't Mike Pence, and Mike Pence isn't on that dais for a reason. I also think it was an important night for Governor Walz to remind folks, by the way, I do have some foreign policy chops. I did serve in Congress. I was there when the ACA was being, attacked and, constantly brought up for votes for repeal, et cetera, and so on. I thought that was an important moment that sort of got lost in the shuffle.
Well, and I'll tell you that the exchange on the ACA is, I think, a great example of Governor Walz did rebut with the truth.
Yeah.
But maybe a more polished debater might have hit JD a little bit harder on just the outright lie he was fabricating.
With a quip,
And so with a quip or a soundbite that could have been the real takeaway, because there was, Senator Vance just served up a fat ball
over the heart of the plate. Yep.
Yeah, right there when he's sitting there calling, President Trump the defender of the ACA. And to his credit, Governor Walz did try to make it very clear. It's like, what are we talking about? President Trump ran on repealing the ACA.
Yep.
His first action was to try to repeal the ACA. He did everything he could to get rid of the ACA, and it was only Senator John McCain who saved the ACA.
Yep.
And then it goes back to Senator Vance, and he just, I mean, without blinking, goes, all I know is that President Trump is the defender and who is the man who fixed the ACA. And a maybe more skilled debater could have immediately like done something with that. But, you know, so that was a perfect example of Governor Walz gave the right answer, but maybe he didn't give the answer that could have been, especially again, if we're talking about these moderates. And I think also, you know, these moderates are also folks who don't like politics in general. So they don't watch a ton of, you know, MSNBC or Fox News or even CNN. Like maybe they just watch their nightly news and they just, you know, they don't come in with all of the background. They don't remember the moment where Senator McCain put his thumbs down. You know, they don't have, and so when they hear Senator Vance saying, well, no, it was President Trump who saved the ACA, they don't necessarily have the facts to be like, oh no, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so there was a moment there to try to help those viewers understand, like, you need to know this man is lying. This is an outright lie.
Yeah.
And Governor Walz got close to it. I don't know if he necessarily put the stake in it as far as like killing that idea. But, you know, again, I think it was a good answer. It was just an illustration of a good answer that there was a chance to be a better answer.
I think we walk away from last night with the notion that do no harm kind of won the night. I don't think either candidate really did any harm to their campaign. I don't think anybody really came ahead. I mean,
and honestly, I think that is absolutely what both campaigns' mission was.
Yeah.
And so I think the campaigns are both internally like, hey, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
JD Vance, you didn't come out of that looking any weirder than people think you are.
Yeah.
Governor Walz, you didn't come out looking crazy. You didn't make any major gaffes. You don't look unprepared for the stage. You look fine.
Yeah.
And that's all the presidential campaigns. Because again, what we have to remind ourselves, this was just the vice president. The job of the vice president is to not harm the administration.
Right.
And so to that end, I think both campaigns are going to feel mission accomplished.
If I had to give Democrats one glimmer of hope from last night that I think gives them the nod, it's that I think that there are going to be more of the gotcha sound bites for the campaign or social media acolytes to turn into something. I think there's a lot more meat on the bone for folks to come back after the fact for leftovers and harvest more sound bites, to attack J.D. Vance and the Trump Vance ticket on the left than there were on the right.
I would agree with that. I think you're as far as, again, we're going to go back to, unfortunately, what does it all matter today? What are the memes that are going to come out of it? I think you're definitely going to come away with more memes skewering the answers and responses that Senator Vance gave. I think the right will, they'll latch on to Governor Walz kind of muffling the time on when he was in China.
And why is that even a big deal? I don't understand. I mean, I don't know what I did 35 years ago in the summer of 2000 or 19. I don't remember that.
Well, because I'll tell you
1989,
why. This is why, and I've noticed them doing it. This has kind of been their strategy with Governor Walz from the get-go. So, first off, what is their job? Their job is whataboutism.
Yeah.
And on the left we say, hey, you guys are wholesale liars. You're literally lying about everything. Well, whataboutism says, well,
back in 1989,
actually, you guys are liars too, because Governor Walz said that he left the military as such and such rank, but technically he actually was this rank. So why is he stolen valor? And then this China thing has become their new. He says that he has this deep experience in China, but technically he was only there for such and such amount of time. I mean, that's what it's become. It's whataboutism. And so last night is going to be their chance to kind of try to blow up, like, see, he can't even get his facts right. He's a liar, just like they say J.D. Vance, which we all know on its face is ridiculous.
Yeah.
An older gentleman slightly muffling his timeline of life
35
is very
years
different.
Ago, right? Yeah,
right. 35 is on a and also around an issue that has nothing to do with any of our daily lives today, is wholesale different than a man standing there saying that the Haitian migrants in Ohio are illegal immigrants, which is not true. And let's not even get into cats and dogs stuff. Like a man lying that Donald Trump was the defender of the ACA, and a man who refuses to say that the 2020 election was a legitimate election that Donald Trump lost. Like those are not lies about timelines of life. Those are wholesale lies about the current reality we live today.
I was stunned that the question even came up, and I was stunned that honestly, Governor Walz didn't just say, "My God, that was 35 years ago. I don't even know what I had for dinner last Sunday. Forgive me, I may have forgotten or misspoken," and moved on. Anyway, Andrew Heaton, local Democratic strategist. Thanks for joining us on a little postmortem from the VP debate, and for joining the Ron Show once again.
Absolutely, Ron. Always happy to come.
So who is Curtis Yarvin, or his pen name, Mencious Moldbug? Well, if that doesn't scare the absolute shit out of you, then I've got some more that absolutely will. JD Vance is a fan, and that should scare the absolute shit out of you. That's up next. The Ron Show airs weekdays 9 to 10 a.m. and 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio. Download the America One Radio app if you'd like to listen then. We also air 7 to 8 p.m. at Progressive Voices on the TuneIn app, so download the TuneIn app if that's how you'd like to listen. Of course, we go to podcast after the fact, show notes at ronshowatl.com. So a couple of things that are happening in the world right now, or at least domestically, are of interest to us. The aftermath of Hurricane Helene, the strength of storms, the discussion about climate change, which kind of didn't really get the meat and potatoes look that it should have gotten last night. Donald Trump, however, at his de facto press conference yesterday, was asked about climate change. And this should give you pause if this is who you are trying to decide should or shouldn't be in control of U.S. governance and responding to natural disasters.
Because global warming wasn't working, because the planet's actually gotten a little bit cooler recently.
Absolutely not true.
But climate change covers everything. It can rain, it can be dry, it can be hot, it can be cold. Climate change, everything is... Look, and I believe I really am an environmentalist. I've gotten environmental awards. But I want clean, beautiful air and clean, beautiful water. That's all, crystal clean water.
And the well-off can have that. It's called NIMBY, not in my backyard. Anyway, there's also the development in the Middle East, Iran and Israel now going seamlessly almost toe-to-toe. Trump and Vance wanted to portray the Biden-Harris administration as being weak on this, when actually it's Bibi Netanyahu, who wants Trump to win, who's not really helping at all in any way, shape, form, or fashion by dialing down the tensions in the Middle East. It also gets at the heart of why there are those who are left of center who are angry with the Biden-Harris administration for continuing to offer military aid to Israel because Netanyahu is being so irresponsible. Anyway, Trump on Iran.
Do you believe that you should have been tougher on Iran after they had launched ballistic missiles in 2020 on U.S. forces in Iraq, leaving more than 100 U.S. soldiers injured?
So, first of all, injured. What does injured mean? Injured means you mean because they had a headache, because the bombs never hit the fort. So just so you understand, there was nobody ever tougher in Iraq. They had no money with me. They would have made any deal with me. I would have had a deal made within 1 week after the election.
Never mind that, again, he has mocked the military who were injured, traumatic brain injuries being a real thing. Never mind that he mistook Iran and Iraq, or got the two mixed up verbally. Never mind the fact that he always makes this promise about, I would have done this, I would have. You were president at the time, and the minute you got in, you scuttled the Iran nuclear deal that your own Secretary of Defense says Iran was largely in compliance with. Anyway, I got off course just a little bit, and I told you I was going to talk about Mencious Moldbug, a.k.a. Curtis Yarvin, who is an American blogger. He's, I guess you could call him a philosopher. He is the person who launched the philosophical movement known as the Dark Enlightenment. He also writes a blog, Unqualified Reservations. Why does he keep coming up with these scary terms? His Substack page is called Gray Mirror. Who is Mencious Moldbug, or Curtis Yarvin? Well, he's someone that J.D. Vance likes to listen to a lot. Rachel Maddow connected the dots a couple of nights ago. I'll include this in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. This is J.D. Vance in an interview explaining his affinity for the way Curtis Yarvin thinks.
You can't teach that we live in a great country if the leaders are actively aligned against it. So almost the thing that you need to do, step one in the process, is to totally replace, like rip out like a tumor, the current American leadership class, and then reinstall some sense of American, political religion.
We need to rip it out like a tumor and then install political religion. The man who is interviewing J.D. Vance here gets very excited about this idea, and it leads, this is important here, it leads J.D. Vance to explain sort of influences on his thought.
How do we, aside from elections, How do we rip out this leadership class? So these institutions are corrupted and rotted to the core. This elite ideology is everywhere and in all the things. What other options do we have besides voting them out, which we're seeing is ineffectual?
You know, there's this guy, Curtis Yarvin, who's written about some of these things.
This is Curtis Yarvin, who J.D. Vance is citing here as he is talking about the need to, seize the universities, use the government to destroy businesses who aren't right wing, talking about needing to rip out the American system like a tumor. Here's the guy he is citing as his sort of the source of his thinking on these matters.
So I've reduced this very complicated problem to a simple 4-letter acronym, which is RAGE. And RAGE stands for Retire All Government Employees. Very, very simple. Now, the problem with this is, why have you never heard this before? Why has no one ever suggested, let's just get rid of this thing? You have a government in Washington. You're either for it or against it. What is government? A government is just a corporation which owns a country. Nothing more, nothing less. It so happens that our sovereign corporation is very poorly managed. And there's a very simple way to replace that, which is what we do to all corporations that have failed. We simply delete them. We haven't been able to do that with our government for 200 years. So it's gotten a little bit stale.
We should delete the U.S. government because it's stale. It has been around for too long. We haven't been able to do that, meaning delete our government for 200 years, so it's gotten a bit stale. Well, what would that entail, deleting the U.S. government?
The other thing about getting rid of your government is you can't just say, well, the limits of the government are the limits of the formal government. You have to say, well, what is the system actually? And it includes a lot of things that are called NGOs, things that are called universities, things that are funded by the state. It's a very, very large system, and it all needs to be destroyed. There's a lot of talented Americans who actually know how to run things and make things work and are generalists. And you can just get these people, put them in a position of responsibility, and have them do their thing. And finally, you need a CEO. And a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing. There's no difference between a CEO and a dictator. If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia.
If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. Tim Walz, the Democratic candidate, has been a governor, is currently the governor. He's been a long-term congressman, high school teacher, football coach, a soldier for decades. J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate, is a different kind of cat, forgive me. Aside from a brief stint in the Marine Corps, where he served with a public affairs unit, he has spent his entire adult life working for or being financially supported by eccentric right-wing tech billionaires. Specifically ones who have devoted themselves to the political teachings of this guy.
Finally, you need a CEO, and a national CEO is what's called a dictator. It's the same thing.
I have debated whether or not to talk about this on the show because I feel like it gives me the oogs. But I also feel like this is an important thing to know about the Republicans' vice presidential nominee and what he has to offer and why he was brought onto the ticket despite his palpable lack of political skill or likability, his lack of any track record in politics whatsoever. And after he spent less than 2 years in the only public office he's ever held, which is a Senate seat that he only barely won thanks to one of those eccentric tech billionaires giving him the single largest Senate campaign donation in the history of this country. I mean, he comes wholly from this very, very obscure, eccentric right-wing subculture of tech billionaires. And his relationship with this eccentric Silicon Valley pro-dictatorship philosophy has been pretty widely discussed in print, but I don't feel like it's widely understood by the country who is paying attention to this guy as a candidate. This is where J.D. Vance's big ideas come from about where the country is heading for. Quote, Vance is friends with Curtis Yarvin, whom he openly cites as a political influence. Yarvin, the main political influence on all of the people who have supported J.D. Vance throughout his career, including paying to install him in the U.S. Senate.
Manchurian candidate, anyone? That's going to do it for today's Ron Show. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on America One Radio. Replay 5 to 6 p.m., 7 to 8 p.m. on Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Have a great day.